Unfortunately, we often wait until we're in the middle of a crisis to try to build the relationships across institutions that would serve us mightily on a regular basis.
Welcome to Radical Cooperation. I'm Dr. Michael Horowitz, Chancellor of the Community Solution Education System. Higher education excels at generating knowledge, but often struggles to share it. Siloed departments, isolated campuses, and competitive mindsets limit collaboration and slow innovation. Today's guest, Dr. Beronda Montgomery, Professor of Biology and former Vice President for Academic Affairs and Dean at Grinnell College, is working to change that. She's a national leader in mentorship and institutional transformation, and author of Lessons from Plants, which explores how plant behaviors can inform human growth and leadership. In this episode, we'll explore why silos persist in higher ed and how we can build systems that foster real cooperation. Dr. Montgomery, welcome to Radical Cooperation.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here.
So can we start by you sharing a bit about your professional journey and how it led you to exploring mentorship and effective leadership strategies?
Absolutely. I always say to people that as an undergraduate student, no one, including me, imagined that I would be a college professor or an administrator, because I had set out intending to go to law school. Had decided very early to go to law school, but became very interested in science in middle school. And so was shooting towards being a biological patent lawyer. But as a part of my studies, got to do some hands-on experimentation and fell in love with science and the idea of being a professor, which for me felt like the opportunity to be a lifelong student. I really love learning. And as a part of starting to explore life as a science professor, I had mentors and realized that a part of being a professor was an opportunity to teach, to mentor, and to really facilitate a space for learning, lifelong curiosity. Ultimately, as I was moving into graduate school and into being a professor, I really became very interested in mentoring those who had come behind me because of the opportunity that mentoring had provided for me. And also realized that as much as we try to set up our spaces as ones of access for learning, that individuals that had been connected to networks were those that were much more likely to find pathways of success, pathways of opportunity. And so I started to think of being a mentor as being as big a part of my work as the curiosity-driven science. And ultimately moved into leadership because I felt that mentorship by individuals had to be embedded in a larger kind of ecosystem of mentoring. And leaders are, of course, the ones who have the opportunity to steward and provide accountability in terms of ecosystems.
That's fantastic. With a title as evocative as Learning from Plants, is there a way that the theme and messages of your book connects to this whole idea of networks and mentoring?
Absolutely. I think that as I was moving into being a professor, I didn't have any professors in my family other than the professors who had taught me. I had not had individuals who I knew. And so I moved into trying to figure out how to be a professor myself. From kind of looking at what is the system that I am in, how does it function, how is it structured? And for me, I immediately started to see parallels to the plants that I was studying in terms of how plants are a part of a system. They're interacting both with the individuals that are around them, but the external environment, and all of those things contribute to how it's able to really maximize its success. So I think it was very early in my own career as I was trying to figure out what it meant to be a professor, what kind of career I wanted to move towards, that I saw parallels from the organisms that I was studying. In complete transparency, I will say that my moving towards really being interested in lessons from plants also came from a kind of frustration I felt and being in systems that there were professors, all of us who had this knowledge. We were all studying plants or biological organisms, understanding the importance of understanding them in context. And yet I didn't always see us using that knowledge in our own environment and communities. And so part of it was also a call to my colleagues to use the knowledge that we had, not just to publish papers and advance our careers, but to use that knowledge in being better in our own communities and stewardship and mentorship in those communities.
My own parents were immigrants and, older parents. And so I definitely didn't have those networks in the United States. I remember my mother always saying to me, is there someone you can ask? And higher education was sort of a new space for me entirely. And I think you're describing a wide swath of students that come to higher education, and it's a new territory for them, and not necessarily one that has the best welcome mats or pathways out for them.
Yes, I think very unfortunately, we still have these kind of hidden curricular um, ways in which we invite people into higher education. And it is kind of I looked at my son who grew up on a college campus and the way he transitioned to college. And that was the first time I saw, that having that capital of being comfortable in a space, understanding how it operates, understanding what office hours are, understanding the particularities, really can cause you to have a much smoother transition. And I believe that in recognizing that, we have an opportunity to say, how do we make that possible for more people? And mentorship is one pathway. Um, but I also think just being more open about the pathways of success is another one. And the beauty of higher ed is the experience that you and I are describing, Michael, that it's supposed to be a place where anyone can come, independent of their background, and grow and learn and explore. And I think we have to do some thinking about how we make that possible for more people.
I mean, and if that was as true as we like to think it is, we wouldn't have our low rates of completion throughout higher ed. In our system, the majority of students are working adults, 35-year-old working woman. And I suspect, based on our conversation so far, we have many who sort of were stymied initially and now, having more maturity and life experience, can come back and tackle this new field. What makes silos form so easily within colleges and universities from your experience and perspective, and why are they so hard to break? Because I can think back 40 years to my undergrad years and observing it even then.
Silos unfortunately seem to be reinforced and rewarded in higher education. I think when you look at our governance structures, when you look at our budgetary models, even when you look at our reward structures, we are often defaulting to rewarding individuals or individual units. And I think that silos are also reinforced by the kind of US, I'm thinking in a US centric model, our US obsession with individual success models, where none of us operate in a silo, but we reward individuals, often not acknowledging the network that they've been a part of that allowed them to have access and to advance. And so when you think about our budgetary models, often we're rewarding individual departments for the number of students they have, or the grant dollars that their faculty have brought in, the rewards and awards that faculty have brought in. And so there can be this competition between departments in a single unit. There certainly can be competition. Even when we think about our merit and raise structures, those are often pitting individuals against each other. And so I think our governance structures and our reward structures reward silos. And the one thing that I've said about students and faculty are that we're very good at doing what's rewarded. We work for the A. And so I think that our models really set up silos. I think also silos can be the way that we get our affirmation. So the unfortunate reality is that there are many leaders who are in their leadership positions, not so much because they have a vision to carry out alone, but it also becomes the structure that rewards their identity. And so the silos can also be the ways in which we kind of seek our affirmation about who we are and what our contributions are. And so I think that there are many different ways in which silos are established and maintained in higher education.
I think you're really onto something. Does that bleed over as well into this idea of prestige sectors? Someone recently said at a conference that Harvard is covered 2,500 times a year in the New York Times, but you almost never see an article on community colleges which educate 8 million students. And then we have all the segments in between, the flagship and the not so flagship within the publics. What are your thoughts about that?
I'm so glad you mentioned that one because that's one I talk about a lot, usually that I didn't come up in my response. I think the prestige models are holding us hostage. And, I think about during the middle of the pandemic, there were colleges that were coming out saying we're ranked number one. And I remember someone on social media said, what does it mean to be ranked number one in this graduate program when we're dealing with this massive kind of global disaster? The prestige models keep us locked into this kind of false narrative that we are individuals. And I keep asking, when are we going to understand that we are a higher education ecosystem? I think we're experiencing it now in the US, right? Is that we're seeing there are ways in which we are a system and that the system can either fail or succeed together. But the prestige model keeps us just wanting to be better and always aspiring to be better than this one and to move within the ranking in ways in which distract us from understanding our power as a collective. And unfortunately, we often wait until we're in the middle of a crisis to try to build the relationships across institutions that would serve us mightily on a regular basis.
Absolutely. I think that's a profound issue in higher education. Doug Lederman, one of the founders of Inside Higher Ed, has talked about really there is no higher ed ecosystem. It's a collection of ecosystems that seem to function distinctly and separately. And it seems somewhat unusual for people to cross sectors as well. If they start in community colleges, that's likely where their career is going to be. If they're in small liberal arts, and of course some of this is entirely dependent on luck or the job market or circumstance at the time they entered the profession, and then it's as if it's God-given, you're higher or lower in the pecking order.
I was going to say, as you were talking about that, I think about for many years, I was doing work in recruitment and retention. And part of the challenge that we talked about is how even our siloed models cause us to celebrate things as an individual or to commiserate over failures as an individual that hasn't changed anything within the higher ecosystem. So I think a lot about how when I left Michigan State and was recruited by Grinnell. Grinnell celebrated the fact that they had recruited an African-American scientist. And Michigan State bemoaned the fact that they had lost one. And the thing that I kept thinking is that the number of Black women biochemists didn't change at all in the higher ed ecosystem by my moving institutions. But the silos have us believe that we have these local victories when nothing is really changing. And I think it can distract us from the greater work that we sometimes say that we're committed to.
That's very profound. So it was viewed as kind of a trade like in sports, and one team is winning and one team is losing, but the league isn't necessarily improving overall. And so what are the biggest missed opportunities caused by siloed thinking, either in higher ed or within colleges and universities?
When you ask that question, I think a lot about, because I am a scientist, I think about innovations in science. And often innovations in science happened in the space of interdisciplinary collaboration, where individuals from two separate spaces are bringing their shared thoughts and resources together. And I think that what happens a lot in these silos is that we are reproducing things over and over as opposed to innovating at the edges. We are squandering resources often because in these moments where resources are limited or not, where you can collaborate, often the resources are able to synergistically be used to take things further. So we are limiting, I believe, our creativity. We're limiting our innovation. We're often using energy over and over, repeating the same thing. So you'll have 10 different colleges on a university campus, very proud of a local mentorship program or very proud of a leadership program, staff program that they've created. And then the next department recreates that same program. And I think about what could happen if we were thinking together, using resources together, creatively working together. So these silos actually limit what we're able to accomplish. It limits the impact of our resources. And certainly, I think we squander energy by reproducing the same thing over and over, whether it's colleges on a single campus or universities across the U.S. Reproducing a redundancy of sort.
In my case, I went to Columbia undergrad and Northwestern for my PhD, and I was castigated when I left to what was derided as, freestanding professional schools. Those schools, of course, are very connected to practice in the real world. And even as an undergrad, helping a professor do research where we were administering New Yorker or New York Times puzzles to undergrads, I thought, I don't know, this seems sort of disconnected from the world at large. And the barrier, though, seems to be, this is the academy, it's real science, and this is practice, and it's sloppy. I don't know if that comes into your space in the same way, but I've seen that pattern throughout my career.
I am often in a kind of two-minded state about this, right? Because what I've watched kind of fall out in the world. And I know that part of the fact that higher ed has struggled to maintain a understanding of its relevance with the public is because often we are divorced from or separated from real world implications of our work. And yet, part of what has kept me in the academy is the ability to have space just to think broadly about the world and life. And so getting an understanding of the power of the two of those, we rarely have an opportunity to see it in action. And despite what people's thoughts are about the vaccine, the COVID vaccine, I think that the COVID vaccine is a perfect example of when all of those things collide. And that's that the science that allowed us to move so quickly from needing a vaccine to having a vaccine available was built upon years of curiosity-driven science about RNA. And so we need to maintain these spaces where we purport people's curiosity, but also have the structures that allow us to pivot that quickly into real world impact, and also to have examples of how that has happened in the past and to share those so that we maintain that space. I truly believe, I just had a son graduate from college in December, and I wanted to know how his degree was going to get him to a job.
As a parent, you were very practical.
Yeah, as a parent, I was very practical. And as I'm paying the tuition checks, his dad and I are paying it, we're like, okay, well, this has to move you to a job at some point. And yet I also love the moments when he and I sit across the table and are talking about world issues, books that he's read, things that I can't really connect to a job, but that show me he has grown from his ability to think. And so I think sometimes we have to figure out how to maintain that space where we continue to explore our curiosities, but we also understand that there are real world implications. Now, if I can say one additional thing, the other beauty of the COVID vaccine story for the conversation that we're having today is that we got there so quickly because in that moment, whereas scientists usually would not collaborate, a moment of urgency brought scientists together across their silos to collaborate to get to a solution. And I think that that's a powerful lesson for us to think about what else we could accomplish much more quickly if we understood and maybe identified other urgencies that would get us to break out of our silos and to work in ways that we never imagined were possible.
That was really close to perfect. I think that we can balance those two things: the desire to learn and grow as people, with the practical fact that education is supposed to lead to certain outcomes in life, namely employment being one of them. You made such a great point about the vaccine. It was truly spectacular, right? And then in the real world implementation, and we're dealing with some of that now, you saw that politics and culture had a big impact on how it was received. So really great points. So what are the most effective ways you've seen to promote collaboration within a university or across institutions?
That's a great question. I happen to be a person who asks the question of how you can do things intentionally, but I also usually take time to look at systems and ask where is it happening naturally, right? Because I think we can learn from both of those. And I think when I look at intentional ways in which organizations, institutions, communities can really promote collaboration and breaking out of silos, often there are innovative funding models. So there have been several colleges and universities that have put some money into funding only when colleges that normally wouldn't work together are working together on an issue. And so kind of funding driven models, resource driven models often work well. I think also models that identify and reward that behavior. We love rewards. And whether that's an award, whether it's recognition, but identifying those and really saying, look at this amazing exemplary model as one. Um, and I think less frequently do we use models that are about accountability, but I have seen some budgetary models that are really trying to put into place accountability for collaboration. And that comes back to money, but that's different than having a call for funding and asking people to think about collaborating together and saying, we expect you to collaborate together. And we're going to be looking for that when we review and set up our budgetary model. So I think you can go from kind of, kind of incentivizing it through a funding model or expecting it through accountability and budgetary models. Now, the other thing that I did, especially during the pandemic, because I was at Michigan State University at the time, and one of the things we did with the was in the provost office, we asked who's working well together about 3 months after the campus had shut down. We said, who's working well together? And we were very unexpected to find that the group that was working best together were 17 deans of 17 colleges across the university. Now, I don't want to disparage deans, but I wouldn't have predicted that deans who are really set up to keep their silo running would have been the group working the best together across the institution. And so I met up with several of them because I had been working with them and asked them, how did that come to be? And we came to find out that they had been meeting for a year and a half prior to the pandemic for purely social reasons. They were getting together once a month just to talk together as deans. And so what that taught me is that breaking out of silos is also relationship driven. And so often when we're thinking about getting people to break out of silos, we just say, you've got to work together without doing the work to make sure that they have the relationships that are founded in trust and respect that allow them to function together. And so that led me to think that as a leader, one of the things that would be most important for me to think about was how to get people to build relationships on a regular basis before you know they're needed. And we know at some point staff and faculty are going to have to work together. So we need to be asking how they're building relationships. If we want to break down silos and you have multiple units, how are the leaders of those units building relationships? So, there are these kind of intentional ways, but unintentionally, you can also break out of silos simply through paying attention to building and cultivating relationships.
I think of that as the power of convening. We talk about radical cooperation in our system. And so we think of any reason to bring together trustees from the different colleges, faculty, chief academic officers. I've never seen a case where we lose by having a meeting around that. And our system has the academic affairs committees of the boards at each institution. For the system, we have the Committee on Academic Collaboration. So to your point, their sole role is to support collaborative activity. This year, we launched the Fellowship Academy for faculty who want to go into leadership, and it's drawing faculty from all 6 of our colleges and universities. And I could tell already from the first in-person meeting that the relationships are forming that will power exactly the kind of activity you're talking about. I think you're absolutely right. We often say, well, you work together, and then we don't set up the framework or the reward mechanism. If there was one thing that you wanted every university president or dean to take to heart about silos and moving it into a more cooperative space, what would it be?
That silos limit our potential. Silos limit our innovation. Silos limit our success, and they really limit our long-term sustainability. When we are in these prestige models of rankings, we might win one year and be ranked higher than someone else. That's a short-term win. But when you really think about the power of higher education to change an individual's life, to change a community's life, to change a society's life, then breaking out of those really is where our growth is, where innovation is. And so I think taking the risk to build a relationship, and I ask presidents and provosts to start small. You said you're talking about your institution, that you're working with 6 institutions. It can be overwhelming to say there are hundreds of institutions in the US. I'm a part of this ecosystem, but how can you start with a few and see the impacts of that and use that as the motivation to break out of the silo and realize that our true power, our true ability to be sustained and have long-term impact is in collaboration, not in the short-term wins of being the best momentarily.
Well, Dr. Beronda Montgomery, thank you for your deep insight and for helping us see how higher education can break free from inherited silos.
Thank you for the invitation to be in conversation. I really, truly appreciate it.
So to learn more about Dr. Beronda Montgomery and her work, visit her website, berondamontgomery.com, and you can find me, Michael Horowitz, on LinkedIn. If today's conversation inspired you, please take a minute to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps others find our show. Thank you for joining us on Radical Cooperation. Collaboration is not just a value, it is a strategy for survival. See you next time.